Welcome back to the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael.
And I am James.
Today we're discussing The Eight Doctors, which is the first novel of the Eighth Doctor Adventures, or the EDAs, which is a series that went on for, 73 books if I recall?
I think it was exactly 73, depending on how you want to call the interference books.
Indeed. And naturally it stars the Eighth Doctor, and it follows the events of the movie almost immediately. So, since we just recently revisited the 1996 movie, we thought it might be a nice time to start this series. So, go times. And it was written by Terrance Dicks, who is a long-time writer of Doctor Who novels. And it's about 280 pages or so. But did you want to read the plot of this one, James?
That I shall, and of course I am reading from the back of the book. Trust the TARDIS. Recuperating after the trauma of his recent regeneration, the Doctor falls foul of a final booby trap set by his arch enemy, the Master. When he recovers, the disoriented Doctor looks in the mirror and sees the face of his stranger. He knows only that he is called the Doctor, nothing more. But something deep inside tells him to trust the TARDIS, and his hands move over the controls of their own accord. The TARDIS takes him to a strangely familiar junkyard in late 90s London, where he is flung into a confrontation between local drug dealers and Samantha Jones, a rebellious teenager from Coal Hill School. But the Doctor soon finds the TARDIS transporting him to various other places in order to recover all his memories, and that involves seeing seven strangely familiar faces.
And as you can imagine, those seven familiar faces would be the first seven Doctors.
I thought they were going to be Daleks.
Well, I mean, all of those faces are familiar, so... Now, it's not to say this maybe not a small appearance by them here. And the nice thing about Terrance Dicks, and I guess it's fair to say we haven't read anything else by Terrance Dicks, but this book in particular has a lot of references to previous material, sometimes in great detail. We see a lot of familiar faces here, and it's a lot of references to past material, but let's go into the characters first before touching on to, I guess, the deeper details. We have the Eighth Doctor, and like we saw, this follows almost immediately from the movie. Somewhat amusingly, he also loses his memory in this one, too. Though I guess to be fair, he didn't really lose his memory in the movie, he sort of just, did they have it at first?
Either way, it's not a great start for his time as a Doctor.
Yeah, I believe he had a somewhat challenging time as the Doctor. Not having read any of his other books, and also not having any experience with his Big Finish audios, I know very little about what the Eighth Doctor has gone through, but it's my understanding that he had a rough go of it.
I am looking forward to his greatest.
That is something to indeed behold. We have Sam Jones, a new companion. She was mentioned in the plot. She doesn't appear that much in this book. It's sort of set up in an interesting way. So the Doctor loses his memory due to a final plan of the Master. The TARDIS sort of takes him to Tatos Lane it's about present day, right? 97?
Yeah, I believe it would be 97, maybe 96.
So the TARDIS takes him to Tatos Lane. He runs into sort of gang dispute. Samantha Jones is, she's about 16, was it?
She's either 16 or 17.
That's the same idea. So Sam Jones, I think the plot described her as rebellious. I don't see exactly how she is rebellious. I guess she was technically cut in class, but she was also snitching on a gang, so you think that would go a bit toward, like, I guess, her good side. We don't really learn a lot about her. She doesn't like drugs, apparently. At least how drugs. She seems to be a vegetarian. Apparently she jogs like 3 miles every morning.
According to her, she doesn't even drink Coke.
Oh, yeah, I remember, yeah. She's a hardcore in the straight edge life. Probably some gold clean fan on her iTunes, if she had iTunes.
No one is going to get that reference.
Yeah, gold clean fan, straight edge band from the, late 90s, mid 2000s.
I guess.
Had like one CD of note and one song of note, but there you go. She also goes to Coal Hill School, which, as I'm sure we all remember, is where Ian and Barbara taught many years back. And also, in the future, where Claire apparently teaches out of nowhere, so that's fun.
Do not get me into Claire just randomly becoming a teacher.
She's a leaf, you know what I mean?
She's a plot device.
A plant got you, fam. And if you don't get that reference, we'll talk about it later, bro. So yeah, in this book, Doctor sort of runs into Sam and the gang she has a dispute with. Then he disappears for like a majority of the novel, doing his own thing, meeting up with his previous selves. So at the very end of the book, he goes back to Sam. So because of that, we only get Sam in a handful of scenes, and we don't really learn that much about her. I imagine that's going to change drastically in the follow-up book, which I think was a Vampire Science, I think.
Yes, the vampire science or something to that effect anyway. Which we, for the record, do not own as of yet.
Yeah, luckily though, we've talked about the prohibitive cost of some of the Doctor Who novels, things like The Dying Days and Longbow, at least in the US, can be upwards of like $300.
Last time I looked up Longbow, and granted this was a couple months back, the only thing on eBay was over $600.
Yeah, luckily it seems like the books published by BBC tend to be on the cheaper end. I'm not saying there's not a few more expensive ones. It may be. It seems like a lot of the expensive ones are the ones published by Virgin, I guess, in the early to mid 90s, as opposed to like some of the late 90s material. That said, something like the Big Finish short trips are going to be more expensive anyway. My point being that EDAs on the whole seem to be a little more cheap, so it should be a little easier to collect them.
Yeah, the only annoying thing about those are going to be the shipping costs.
Yeah, that's always the problem. Moving on, we have a handful of Gallifreyan characters, because a lot of this book actually takes place on Gallifrey. In fact, during 2 different time periods, which is sort of funny. But we have President Flavia, who we actually saw briefly in The Five Doctors.
Who, for the record, my brother and I don't really remember, but TARDIS Wiki says that our memory is terrible. Though, to be fair, we've only seen The Five Doctors, what, maybe twice? Maybe
Yeah,
3 times.
Yeah, I think we've seen it twice-ish. I remember bits and pieces, but it's been a while. And in this book, she is the president, then she's deposed, then she becomes president again. And like I said, we get 2 different time periods. And yeah, there's some good story there. Related, we get President Norik, who is the president during the time of Trial of the Time Lord. And he seems somewhat corrupt-ish, but I guess that's what a lot of Gallifreyan presidents sometimes seem like.
I mean, honestly, it's what the society seems like.
You're not wrong. We have a character, Ryoth, who we actually don't have it written down. I think he was someone in the temporal office thingy.
I think so. I mean, maybe it might have just been I don't know if counselor's the right word.
Yeah, whatever he was, though, he doesn't really pop up that much, but he does have some story in, I guess you could say, the quote-unquote present-day Gallifrey. And he has somewhat of a sudden ending, which I found rather amusing. It's like one of my favorite sentences in the book.
Yeah, it came. I'm not going to say it came out of nowhere, but it was very quick, kind of surprising. Like, there was some setup, and once you saw the setup, you realize, oh, something's about to happen. But yeah, it happened very quickly.
It just hit me. He's sort of, we've mentioned this before, but he's like the TV trope, like Disc 1 Final Battle.
Not only is he a Disc 1 Final Battle, but the Doctor didn't even know he was the boss.
Yeah, that's actually true. Doctor had no idea this guy was doing. That's how irrelevant this guy turns out to be. It's funny stuff. We have Ingen, who is a coordinator of the Matrix, and he also popped up in the series, if I recall. I'm assuming.
Yeah, yes, he was in The Deadly Assassin, and I almost recognized the name. Obviously, again, TARDIS Wiki, doing as it always does, elucidates on the matter. But yeah, he was in The Deadly Assassin.
Yeah, and past that point, apparently he retired from being a coordinator, and he actually was on the High Council of Gallifrey, I think as an independent. He later returned to his role as coordinator, but they changed it to keeper. So he pops up a bit. It's so fun to see him, mainly because he's like an older individual who the Doctor seems to respect decently, so it's nice. And actually, speaking of which, we also have Borusa popping up after the events of the Five Doctors. And on a side note, like James said, I don't remember the Five Doctors all that well. I remember a lot of the main gist of it. But like, if you're talking about the details of who was doing it, why they were doing it, I can't say I remember that much. Like I said earlier, Dicks goes into great detail over some of these classic stories, and the Five Doctors is one of them. So we get some Borusa here toward the end of the book, post Five Doctors, and it's sort of nice to see.
Yeah, he gets a kind of redemption of sorts compared to what he had done in the Five Doctors. And it's funny because he had been a quote-unquote gold Time Lord for almost all of his regenerations. He just apparently had a bad regeneration. And so he redeems himself a lot in some ways.
Yeah, even the Doctor has a lot of respect for him. And to be fair, I think it mentioned that he was one of the Doctor's professors at the university.
Yeah, no, he was one of the Doctor's teachers from way back in the day.
So it makes sense that the Doctor would have a deference to him. And you can really see it, too, toward the end of the book.
Yeah, you don't see the Doctor deference to many people in almost any form of media, but Barusa is actually one of them.
And actually, speaking of another one, there's also Rassilon. We get some classic Rassilon here, too.
Yeah, and you'd think, but is it Rassilon Dad? And you'd be right, but you'd also be wrong. Because that's the time would ever really die, especially if you're Rassilon.
You at Lan. Yeah, he has some sequences toward the end of the book naturally connected with Barusa. So it's fun to see. There's a lot of stuff going on at the end of the book, and there's a nice little element too.
Yeah, and Rassilon had some interesting things going on. He didn't appear all that much. Basically, the 8th Doctor went to the tomb in the Death Zone. Again, very reference-heavy. I don't know if Terrance Dicks wrote the 5 Doctors. Actually, this is worth looking up. So I shall look it up. For the record, yes.
What, Dicks actually did write it?
No, that's the thing. He wrote a lot of the stuff he was referencing.
Oh. Well, actually, that's fun because it's sort of expanding on what he might have wanted to throw into the actual story that they did have time to explain.
Not only expansion, but it's also what he knows best. He literally wrote the original, so obviously he probably doesn't even need his TARDIS to go back to make sure he remembers what happened there. So that makes a lot of sense in context. But anyway, back to Rassilon. The 8th Doctor goes to Rassilon to make a deal with him to free Barusa because of a conflict going on Gallifrey in the political realm. And then the Doctor returns to Rassilon at the end. And it is kind of funny. Rassilon's like, aren't you forgetting something, Doctor? And then the Doctor's like, what? And then he remembers the whole issue with Sam, who was about to be attacked by the drug dealer who she snitched on. And snitches get stitches, so she was about to learn. But apparently the Doctor didn't want her to learn, and he goes and saves her. But Rassilon mentions that during the Doctor's tracks through his own history, him meeting up with his previous incarnations, that the Doctor made some temporal changes, and a direct quote is improvements to the pattern of history, which I do wonder if there's going to be maybe not a direct arc, but maybe a small Rassilon arc, that maybe Rassilon set something up here, like a sort of chess master, and maybe we'll see something in the, maybe not the direct next one, but in the upcoming books.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, and this may go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Much like the Voyage and New Adventures, which starred the 7th Doctor, the EDAs are theoretically one continuous story. So, for instance, you can't really read the 59th, or you probably shouldn't read the 59th book without reading like the previous ones. Or so I would assume. So, reading these all in order would hopefully bring like a whole cohesive thing with, like James mentioned, potentially a bunch of things like that. Like, in this book, the Celestial Intelligence Agency pops up quite a bit to some detrimental effect. And I'm wondering if perhaps they're not like one of the primary antagonists through some of the later books. I sort of hope they might be. But it's things like that that might be set up here that we might see later on. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, from my small knowledge from just trolling through the TARDIS wiki, I know in the EDAs there's the Faxon paradox, which sounds inherently confusing, and that's going to be a treat. I know there's also a war in heaven, which I read 2 paragraphs of on the TARDIS wiki, and even then I didn't really understand it. So that sounds really promising. So I think there's actually going to be, maybe not as a mainstay, but a good thorough line of Gallifrey stuff going on in the EDAs, which I do not think was the case with the Voyage and New Adventures with the 7th Doctor.
Yeah, we haven't had the chance to read any of the VNAs yet. We do have, I think, the first 3? Or is it 1, 2, and 4 that we have?
Yeah, I think we're missing the third one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's like a time warm 4-part story, so that sounds fun.
Actually, now that I think about it, I think we're missing the fourth one and we actually have the third one.
Either way, we haven't read any of them yet. But yeah, I imagine there's probably not a lot of Gallifrey in those books. But either way, I've heard it's somewhat of a complex toy, so hey, that should be fun. But for the last character that we should mention, it's just going to be the Master. As you might expect, given the whole story is sort of set up, because it's like a final trap from the Master. The Master does pop up toward the end of the novel, though not in present day time, but in like trial of a Time Lord time period. So it's good stuff there.
Well, he also pops up in kind of a little previously present day time now, because the whole part with the, and we'll get into this a little later, the Death Worm Morphant, that was at trial of a Time Lord time.
Yeah, they give us a little like prelude to what the Master gets up to, like post Cheetah Warlord, so like post Survivor stuff, which I thought was fun.
And for the record, it's contradicted like 2,000 times. But welcome to Doctor Who media.
Yeah, we just blame the toy maker and move on. Am I right?
It's not an unreasonable thing to do, honestly. It's better to blame the toy maker than to blame Dicks. The thing is, I was doing a little reading, I think they actually tried for some consistency. Some, at least with the novels, the written word, as it were. They did try for some consistency with the VNAs. But when the EDAs came along, writers, well, it was moving from Virgin to BBC. Some of the writers changed. Certainly the one who was the, what do they call it? The head of the main editor of the reigns. Basically the showrunner, only in terms of the books. Editor-in-chief, perhaps. And obviously the editor-in-chief changed. And I think they were given a lot more free reign to just kind of do as they pleased. They weren't as concerned about continuity. They weren't as concerned about, but wait, that would be a retcon. The writers were kind of just given a bit more of a wide berth, which has its pros and cons. And I have a feeling for somebody like Terrance Dicks, nobody is going to tell him what he could or couldn't write. He's Terrance Dicks. He was one of the mainstays of the show in the 70s. And I just think it's slightly interesting. And as Ava mentioned, the Doctor who lost his memory is being directed by his TARDIS, basically, to meet previous selves, previous incarnations that he has had, to try to fill in the gaps in his memory. When he meets, for example, the first Doctor, he gets all the memories of the first Doctor up to the point they meet. And when he meets the second, he fills in all the space up to the point they meet. And it goes on that way. It reminds me in some ways of a type of video game, lads. Like, I know analogy is common to me, but it just makes me think of a video game for some reason. And of course, it's Terrance Dicks, as we mentioned, he's referenced Harvey. So every single one of these meetings takes place either during or right after a story from the classic series. And the 8th Doctor meets the 1st Doctor during the very first story, which we have talked about, an unearthly child. And in fact, he meets him during a scene which we, I think, talked about maybe not in length, but we certainly mentioned all that time ago when we discussed it, when the 1st Doctor picks up a rock and looks as though he's about to perhaps kill the injured member of the party who they had with him at the time.
If I recall, it's just going to have him draw him up, bro.
Yeah, that was his very, very lame excuse.
I'm pretty sure Ian believed him.
And which, for the record, was used verbatim in this book, because you see the before and after. Basically, when the Doctors meet, time kind of passes, so they can have a discussion. Yeah,
this is time bubble that we don't really know how long it lasts, but it lasts for a little bit. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes, but it eventually pops. But it gives them a little bit of time to talk to each other. Luckily, they have that contact thing that they do, and that's where all the memories come back, and the 1st Doctor immediately knows that the 8th Doctor is going to be a future incarnation, which I think is sort of interesting, actually. And one of the memories that the 8th Doctor gains, actually, is of the 1st Doctor's departure from Gallifrey, which I find really interesting because there's like conflicting origins as to why the Doctor left Gallifrey. It was during Capaldi's time that the whole hybrid thing was going on, right?
Yeah, I believe that was season something. Yeah, that was Capaldi.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be honest with you. I literally don't remember what the hybrid was and or is and or means and or could have been. Like, I remember having sand because, I mean, of course, having sand was one of the best episodes. I've considered one of the best episodes of the modern series. Certainly a strong performance by Capaldi. But point being, I remember having sand decently well because I've seen it maybe twice, maybe 3 times. I've only seen Howlband once. I don't remember much about it. And I'll be honest, maybe the hybrid's even me. It might not even have anything to do with. See, I don't even know. See, my point being, no idea what the hybrid is.
I actually have only seen Howlbound once, I think. I think it has to have only been once. I have rewatched the entire series a few times, but only up to Matt Smith's era. And I think I literally stopped at Deep Breath. Although that one I have seen, Shaz. But yeah, the problem with the hybrid thing was they actually gave no conclusive answer. There were a lot of strong hints for a certain conclusion, and eventually one of the writers said that was what we were talking about when we talked about the hybrid. That the show in that season literally gave an option after option after option, and it never directly said one way or the other. So that's probably why you don't remember what the hybrid actually was. And I don't blame you either.
Yeah, and there's just one of the things that, if I recall, was just trying to give a potential origin story as to why the Doctor left Gallifrey. I think in that case, he was scared of something and ran away, and this gives another interpretation. And I'm actually going to quote straight from the book, which I don't usually do when we're reading. And this is a little bit of a longer passage, but I do find it legit interesting. And just to set up the context of the quote, it's talking about the memories that the 8th Doctor gains. So, with that context in mind, here is the quote. And apologies for mispronouncing Pridonian, or however you happen to pronounce it, it's coming up. Memories of public life and of rising high in the ranks of the Time Lords. Suddenly he was in the council chamber on Gallifrey, wearing the high-collared orange and scarlet robes of the Pridonian chapter, his voice raised in anger against his fellow council members. He was striding down the long marble corridors of the capital, still seething with anger. He stood in a vault, deep beneath the capital, opening the door of an obsolete, erratically functioning Type 40 TARDIS. He heard the voice of a young girl. "Grandfather, wait. I'm coming with you." And I found that little section fascinating. There's no Clara there trying to point out, no, you want that one, which is one of the things that grinds my gears, shall I say. But we'll get there later.
I mean, I actually kind of liked that a little, but...
Yeah, I like the idea of showing it. I thought was it something like a very long time ago, how it started.
Yeah, no, that was a really fun beginning to the episode. I think the episode as a whole, like I said previously, was a complete mess. Well, the ending really was a mess, but that beginning was just such a fun beginning. Because who was going to expect that when starting the episode? And the episode, for the record, being the name of the Doctor.
Yeah, and I just really appreciate just a little image of the first Doctor apparently being on the council and leaving in anger. I sort of wonder what they were arguing about. It's just a sort of interesting little image of his past life. Because we don't really know, or at least I don't really know, almost anything about what the Doctor's life was while he was on Gallifrey. I know there's been a few references here and there. In fact, this even mentions his mother and father specifically. So it's sort of interesting to think about too. So yeah, we don't learn that much, but I just like the little snippet right there. And I sort of hope we see more of that in either this series or I imagine potentially with the whole Longbow stuff, I imagine that type of stuff comes up too.
Oh, speaking of Longbow, I've heard this book actually retcons Longbow. But again, that's Doctor Who for you, so that's not even something to be all that worried about. Because as Margaret said earlier, the Toymaker solves all.
Yeah, and it might retcon Longbow, but my daddy owns a Longbow.
Best reference ever.
Yeah, it might retcon Longbow, but since we've not actually read Longbow, obviously I can't say I noticed anything. So I imagine it did at some point, but I just wouldn't even be aware of that.
From what I know about Longbow retcons Longbow, it sounds not easy to comprehend.
You got them looms, brah?
I see, looms is something I almost get. But we'll get you the looms, I guess, in 4,000 years when we finish the 7th Doctor books.
Yeah, you at Lan. But it was nice to see the first Doctor in his sort of brutally self, talking with the 8th Doctor. And on a related note, it's nice to see Tatus Lane again too. In fact, we even see the junkyard the foreman's junkyard from the very first story and very first episode of Doctor Who.
Almost the very first scene as well.
Yeah, it's such an atmospheric scene, just the opening. Police officer walking by during that fog. It's just beautiful. And I really like how the Eighth Doctor sort of goes through this journey to make himself whole again. It's such a nice little way to, one, show off a lot of past stories and references, and it also makes sense in story. It's just sort of comforting, to be honest.
Yeah, to me it feels like a love letter to the history
Yeah,
before
that's
moving on to the new.
It's a really good description, actually. So, I mean, technically, Dicks probably was involved with a lot of this material, so sort of a love letter to himself. But hey, if it works, it works.
I mean, in some ways, with how much he wrote, like maybe it's the same. It's not, but either way. And it is interesting to point out that the first two meetings with the first Doctor and the second Doctor are smaller meetings where they just have a discussion. And really, actually, not the thing about the third Doctor, but the third Doctor goes into a lot more detail than these other ones. And from then on, there are actual story adventures that happen. But the second Doctor, the Eighth Doctor meets him, actually rather atmospherically, during the War Games. The Eighth Doctor meets the second right before the second is about to contact the Time Lords to transport all of the people back to their planets and times of origin. And before the Eighth Doctor meets the second Doctor, he travels through this war zone that we saw the second Doctor travel through. All these soldiers fighting these endless battles with no winning and losing. I thought the whole section was extremely atmospheric.
Yeah, it had a really nice, hopeless vibe to it. I think they did a really good job sort of capturing the sort of meandering pointlessness of the battles. I mean, the soldiers just fighting, and it just came across really well as it was written.
And fun fact, Terrance Dicks actually wrote the War Games with, and this is fascinating, he wrote it alongside Malcolm Houck, which, of course, Malcolm Houck did a lot of things during the Third Doctor era, as Dicks did. So it's interesting to see that they were both involved in the final story for the second Doctor. But now it's not a surprise why it happened to be the War Games where the Doctors end up meeting.
Yeah, and as for meeting the Third Doctor, we actually get a little bit of setup. We see the Third Doctor post the Sea Devils, and I forget which season the Sea Devils would have been in, but it's after the Master escapes, and we actually see a little bit of some chasing going on. Master escapes in like one of those water boats and then steals a car from someone, and it even follows up a little bit on the Damons, because he actually goes back to, what was that, Davos and, I think?
Davos Ann sounds right to me.
And we actually see that one woman again. I forget, like Elizabeth or something. She's just like that woman.
She's a woman I even recognize. I don't remember too much about that one on the whole, honestly.
Yeah, the Damons is one of those classic stories, like many of them, that we've actually only seen once. Now, I remember quite enjoying it, but we've only seen it once. So, yeah, we got references to him being a vicar and such, but it went into a little bit of detail there too. So I found it so fun how it's both like in afterwards of the Sea Devils and the Damons. Just nice to see. Plus we get the compression gun thingy.
Yeah, the tissue compression something. Ray? Something to that effect. In a lot of ways, it's kind of funny. For gold, I would say 30, maybe even 40. Maybe not as many as 40, but either way, for a good portion of this section, the 8th Doctor didn't even appear. It was just a Third Doctor adventure with Joe at his side, trying to catch up to the Master after the end of the Sea Devils. It felt like a very classic Third Doctor thing going on.
Yeah, and speaking of which, we actually got some Brigadier too.
Yeah, back at the unit base, the first time we actually see the 8th Doctor in all of this, the Brigadier is walking into the Doctor's laboratory, and he just runs into the 8th Doctor. And of course, he's the Brigadier. He wants to know how this guy got into a classified area like this. And the Doctor is able to reassure him, oh, it's okay. I know the Doctor, blah, blah, all of that stuff. He didn't actually tell him that I am the Doctor. He just said that he was good friends with the Doctor. And then, of course, the Third Doctor and Joe get back to the base. And the 8th Doctor, 3rd Doctor chat. The Master tries a very sneaky, I didn't even think about it, But he tries to kill the Doctor one more time, fails. He's the master, that's what he does. Not a very good name for him if he fails at the time. But then it was pretty funny, actually, and it fits in with some portrayals of the Third Doctor. The Third Doctor almost threatens the Eighth Doctor's life because he's jealous the Eighth Doctor's a walking TARDIS, and at this time the Third Doctor did not.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning the Third Doctor sort of pissed that he took the Eighth Doctor's advice to contact the Time Lords when he was the Second Doctor. So that comes up too, and it's sort of funny.
Yeah, when he was talking to the Second Doctor, the Eighth Doctor advised him, hey, contact the Time Lords. It'll be okay. Yeah, you might be punished a little, but the Time Lords will be lenient because you've saved multiple people in multiple times. And the way that time works is actually quite interesting. Each subsequent incarnation recalls the previous meeting they've had with the Eighth Doctor. So when they see the Eighth Doctor again, they're like, oh, it's you again. Which is maybe almost verbatim what the Third Doctor said. And yeah, the Third Doctor was not happy with the results. He did not like his exile, which he knew from the show, but it was even more relevant here, where he literally almost threatened the Eighth Doctor's life. But he decided to not do so and just go on with his day. And then the Eighth Doctor meets the Fourth Doctor in what might be my second favorite part of the book, because it was so random yet so interesting. And that would be after the story State of Decay, which of course took place in E-Space.
Yeah, and during all of this, we get some present-day Gallifrey, and when I say present-day, I mean during the Eighth Doctor's time, some Gallifrey during that. And there's some coordinators in, like, I don't know the official terms, I'm not going to try to remember them. The point being, they sort of watch timelines and see if anything goes amiss. And this watching the Doctor's timeline, and they sort of see the Doctor sort of going back and talking to each of his individual selves. And when the Doctor goes to E-Space, he sort of like disappears, and they're sort of briefly wondering, hey, is the Doctor #dad fam? And he's not. But because he goes to E-Space, it sort of almost disappears off the little recording device.
Yeah, and there we get to see, again, a small advance that wasn't in the show of Romana and then the Doctor getting attacked by some remaining vampires in the outskirts of the place they were in, all while the people who rebelled against the three who rule?
Yeah, I think it was the three who rule.
Well, those people are actually working on setting up a government, which is not easy.
No, but it was fascinating. There was a little thing about an individual who had died during the attack, and there was a bit of a discussion as to how to memorialize him. Like someone suggested, like, what, just a table? Someone suggested a statue, and I think they started on a column. It's just a funny bit of micromanagement that sort of just cracked me up a bit.
Indeed, that was a pretty fun section. It was also pretty atmospheric. I recall enjoying State of Decay a lot. I think we said that one actually twice. And it was just a very nice direct follow-up to State of Decay. Next up, we get to see the meeting of the Fifth Doctor with the Eighth Doctor, and this is taking place, funnily enough, after the Five Doctors, when the Fifth Doctor, Tolo, and Tegan are just kind of relaxing, trying to just have a vacation, which I believe is what they were trying to do before they got interrupted during the Five Doctors.
Yeah, and this is where it gets sort of interesting too, the timeline, because, like I said, on present day, from the Eighth Doctor's time, there's some people watching the Doctor's timeline going back and meeting, and one of these people, Ryuth, who we mentioned before, he doesn't particularly like the Doctor. He's one of those, like, hardliners, the Doctor is a renegade, he should be executed type thing. It's a quality guy. And he has his own stuff going on too, but he actually tries to set a trap to kill the Eighth Doctor. Actually, I forget if he was talking the Eighth or the Fifth. I probably did it mad from his POV, but point being, he used a time scoop, I think it was called, and was trying to send things from the Death Zone, from the Five Doctors that the Fifth Doctor just experienced, trying to send things from the Death Zone to the Fifth Doctor to take care of him, including the Rastin Warrior robot, which was a silver sphere-throwing thing that I didn't remember the name to, but it's recognizable once you see it and once it's described in detail. I think it only popped up in the Five Doctors, right?
Yeah, it was just in the Five Doctors. It randomly took out the whole crew of Cybermen.
Yeah, and in this one, it goes fucking hard, bruh. It takes out a whole bunch of Centaurans, which the guy Astro sent to try to take care of the Doctor once he saw the rusting warrior robot wasn't quite doing the job as quick as he hoped. Yeah, I thought it was fun. He actually tried to draw shake, but it didn't work.
Well, no, I was about to say, he sort of really tapped it too.
You ain't lying. The thought attempt somewhat backfires, and it backfires beautifully. That's all I have to say.
And by backfires, I mean he gets eaten by a Jurassic.
Yeah, it was, again, one of my favorite sequences. It didn't come out of nowhere because we sort of saw what the Eighth Doctor was trying to do, but it was amusing. And seeing the Eighth Doctor and the Fifth Doctor meet was fun, also, mainly because the Eighth Doctor sort of goes hard at times. Like, when he was meeting the Fourth Doctor, he was killing vampires like he was fucking Blade, bruh. Like, he went all out decapitating some vampires up in this.
Yeah, this would not have played in the classic series. Who was that woman, Mary White? She would have had the heart attack.
And when meeting the Fifth Doctor, he sort of uses some tactics toward the Centaur, sort of tricking them to initiate with this rusting warrior robot. And the Fifth Doctor doesn't necessarily approve of the tactics the Eighth Doctor is using, which I found sort of funny. And I mean, it's also in character too. So,
I mean, it's also funny because we saw that same exact attitude between the Fifth Doctor and the Sixth Doctor when they met in the Sands of Time. Because the Fifth Doctor was annoyed at how not deceitful, but he was annoyed at how the Sixth Doctor played the sirens at the end of the story.
So it's not out of character to be sort of, I guess, the moralizing Doctor.
I mean, yeah, he was the guy who supported fair play and saying, oh, it's not cricket. It makes a lot of sense that he would have that type of stance. And I do like how the book phrased him. That he seemed, I forget the exact, but he seemed weak if you didn't know him. Something to that effect. I just enjoyed the phrasing when they introduced the Fifth Doctor.
And that people would underestimate them to their own peril. So it's a good little encapsulation of the Fifth Doctor, who we've mentioned before isn't a particularly favourite Doctor of ours, but certainly some aspects of him can be appreciated, and I think that's one of them. Yeah, and as for meeting the Sixth Doctor, it gets a bit interesting because a majority of the finale of the novel actually takes place during it, and that's during the Sixth Doctor's trial, during Trial of a Time Lord, specifically the Ultimate Fall, which was such a mind-boggling story. But we do see some very out action and a lot of Gallifreyan stuff that actually we want to touch on a little bit later. But the Sixth Doctor and all of his blustering, boisterous self was really fun to see here, especially when he and the Eighth Doctor were screwing around on Gallifrey. Because, as you can imagine, the Sixth Doctor is really fighting for his life since he sees his trial isn't going his way. And he really wants some answers as to why this trial is even taking place, which was just fascinating.
Yeah, besides some very strange, especially reading it in current day, 2025, dismissals of the accusation of genocide. Did you catch it when he said the Vervoids were artificially created, so genocide doesn't apply to them or something to that effect?
Yeah, it did come across as somewhat defensive. Like he was just defending his choice to take out the Vervoids.
Yeah, and the Eighth Doctor was, oh yeah, of course, like that doesn't even make any sense. And does it read great? I'm not sure what Terrance Dicks' politics were, but I wonder if he might have been one of the people on the right side of the spectrum. But I don't know, that's neither here nor there.
And to be fair, the 90s was a slightly different time too. That type of thing I don't think would be written by most writers nowadays.
I would think not. But either way, besides that strangeness, this was a whole interesting section that we'll talk about more in detail. Before we do that, we just wanted to round off with the Seventh Doctor. And the Seventh Doctor is basically in a midlife crisis. He feels depressed. This seems to be after all of the events of the Voyager New Adventure series. He mentions that he has no companion right now. That I don't remember exactly how he phrases it, but Ace has left him. He's just traveling alone. He's feeling pretty down. He decides to try his luck on Metabolis. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but Metabolis 3, which is the home of the lovely Eight Legs and apparently Rocks.
And that's a planet that what the Third Doctor tried to get to multiple times. Wanted to show Joe Matabalas 3.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was Joe. I know it was a running theme during the last season of the Third Doctor that he kept trying to get to the planet and he kept not being able to get there, which means he really sucks at piloting the thing, but we kind of knew that. And of course, by the time he gets there, he gets piloted.
Yeah, and Planet of the Spiders is another one of those classic stories you've seen just once. So it's sort of nice to see a brief follow-up there, because we see some remaining spiders from such a long time ago wanting revenge on the Doctor's actions during that story. And he gets whopped up and it's all good fun. Well, he does have fun, but at least he doesn't get eaten, so something.
Which had been a strong possibility.
Yeah, luckily the Eighth Doctor saves him. And it's sort of an interesting thing, because the Eighth Doctor feels almost a responsibility to warn the Seventh Doctor about his untimely and really unfortunate death in San Francisco. But the Seventh Doctor can sort of feel his, I guess, struggle and says, I'll just do what happens and it's okay. Without me dying, there would be no you. So he sort of comes across as sort of grandfatherly, like he sometimes did when he was being a chess mastery dig.
Yeah, he had a very nice attitude in this book, honestly. We don't see him for all that long. Most of the time is spent. I would say a good fourth of the novel is spent during the time with the Sixth Doctor. I think. Maybe a little less than a fourth. Maybe a fifth. But either way, so we get only a small section with the Seventh Doctor. But I thought it was a rather nicely written section.
Yeah, and it was certainly atmospheric too. It's sort of nice seeing the Seventh Doctor sort of struggling with, like James said, a midlife crisis type situation, which I even saw a little bit in Files of Vulcan, although that was like an early example before he went all dark-ish.
It's funny, I was thinking actually the same exact thing. That obviously the Files of Vulcan is way early in his time, because that was before even Ace, and this is way after. But it is nonetheless still his seventh generation, so I wouldn't be surprised if he went through fits and bouts of that.
And like James said, a lot of the finale of the novel, probably the last fourth, focuses on the Eighth Doctor working with the Sixth Doctor to try to figure out exactly why and who planned this trial against the Sixth Doctor. So we go into a lot of extended detail from Trial of a Time Lord as to who set up this trial, why is it taking place on some space station. I forget what the space station was called, but it did take place in Gallifrey. We go into why that was the case. And it all comes across as almost like a political thriller type thing with a lot of intrigue going on. And I really enjoyed it. It was, in my opinion, I thought it was decently tense. I thought it was legitimately interesting. We get some Flavia here, and at this point she's not president, it's actually Norik. And we find out that he became president sort of out of nowhere, since people began questioning Flavia's ascendance, which is somewhat, I don't know, seat of the pants type thing after the event of the Five Doctors. So some people question that, and then Norik comes out of nowhere to take presidency. So we get some interesting political stuff on Gallifrey. Injin comes back with some pretty nice words for the Doctor. I don't know, the whole thing I thought came across really well. Mainly because, and I've mentioned this probably a bit before, I was never all that wild about some of the more Gallifrey-centric stories of Classic Who. Some of them, such as The Invasion of Time, were pretty fun. But some of them I thought were a bit, I don't know, maybe drab. They just didn't do it for me. But I thought they did a really good job here making it interesting. And especially when they're throwing a potential revolt against Gallifrey by, and I may not be pronouncing it right, but the Shobogans?
I think it's the Shobogans.
Shobogans? Yeah, and it's fun. We learn a little bit about the Doctor's past life. He references going out of the capital with the Master as teenagers. Well, I guess what would be effectively teenagers. Just going out drinking, hanging with the Shobogans. It's fun. And I think it's pretty tense. And we see some good political back and forth type stuff going on. We see the whole council of Time Lords, some of which haven't been seen in literal years, apparently. Just out trying to get together, trying to hold a quorum to avoid being deposed. It's just a lot of stuff going on. It's action-packed. You could argue it's maybe anticlimactic, but I do think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it had all the hallmarks of a political conspiracy. there was a lot of involvement with the CIA, with the whole Ravalax situation, which was covered in the Trial of a Time Lord. And in fact, I do recall at the end of the Trial of a Time Lord, it did mention that the president and the High Council was deposed, that the Sixth Doctor learns about in the Trial of a Time Lord, and they try to make him president again. If I'm not mistaken, maybe I'm wrong about that, but either way, of course, just runs off and leaves. But we actually get to see on the other side of what was happening on Gallifrey during all of that, and it was really all very fascinating. I quite enjoyed basically all of it. There were some strange things, like how basically Barusa's role in this is where the Eighth Doctor went to go get Barusa. Barusa's role in this was basically to become a dictator for the greater good. The High Council needed a strong man to try to guide the system back, so there wasn't going to be a revolution against them, which, for the record, at least some of those High Councillors agreed to move the Earth from one section of the universe to another, which ended up destroying it, which was the Horavalax thing. And so you might think a revolution might actually be a good idea, but the problem was that this would have been, and I'm not going to get too into detail because we've been going for a bit, obviously, because this book kind of needs it to be fair to it. It reminded me very much of a color revolution, because the revolution against the High Council that would have happened would have been basically planned by the Celestial Intelligence Agency. And they were actually talking about making a deal with the Master and having the Master become president of Gallifrey with the CIA backing. And the Celestial Intelligence Agency is not all that much different or worse than the CIA that we have in the United States. And that's the same exact type of thing that we have done. Look at the Hong Kong situation, look at Belarus, and that we probably will do in the future. Well, unless Trump dismantles the entire government. But besides that,
yeah, it's worth mentioning that if you don't know the details of the USA's foreign policy towards a lot of these other countries, it's just horrifying. It's depressing, it's horrifying, and it's non-ending, apparently.
Yeah, if you want to do any reading on this issue, Killing Hope by William Blam is an extremely good resource, and I'll just leave it at that. It's not Doctor Who related, obviously, but go take a look at that if you're interested in the history of US interventions in other countries. But so, the whole Barusa becoming a dictator in everything but name was kind of strange, but besides that, this whole section of the book was really well written, and I did quite enjoy the political conspiracy elements of it. It very much reminded me of a 70s political thriller or a 60s, like for example 7 Days in May, which I've always quite liked.
Yeah, and with the whole Barusa thing, I personally thought that Barusa would get up to the podium and say, hey, everyone should get behind Flavia, or something like that. But no, he just takes power back himself for a bit, which I found sort of funny, and given what Barusa did last time he was in power, somewhat questionable. But like James said, it was a mistake of a ponderous youth. And one thing I should mention about the actual writing of the book, it seems to largely be, at least in my view, more accessible, which you might expect given it's a first book in what's to be a long-running series. But it seems a lot more accessible than some of the previous things that we've read, certainly.
Accessible is one way you said. I think it's pretty obvious the writing is actually a lot more simple, I would say, and I'm not meaning it completely derogatorily. I mean, keep in mind, Dicks is the person who wrote so many of the novelizations of the classic series, and most of those are really short, about, 100, 110 pages around there?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So obviously you need to be concise and really to the point. You can't really be all that flowery when doing those. So I understand that. But especially reading this right after, well, not right after, but our last book was The Man in the Velvet Mask. And comparing those two is almost night and day in terms of writing style. Now, writers will do their own thing, obviously. Even in these long-running series, it's going to have multiple different writers doing their own styles and their own takes. But there is still such a diametric difference between the way that Dicks wrote and the way that then it was done in The Man in the Velvet Mask and Monogram and the previous books we've read. And there are pros and cons to that. I'll happily agree the book felt a lot more accessible. But I'm also not sure the writing style was even half as good. There are some things in the book that just felt too simple for me. But one thing I really did like about his writing was it was very obvious Dicks was not a fan of the 1996 movie. Because on the very first page of the book, the Eighth Doctor, who has just finished the Time Machine, rereading the Time Machine, thinks back to the adventures of the movie, which, because I'm almost certainly due to rights issues, Grace is not even mentioned by name or even referenced. And she was such a big part of the movie as a whole and to the Doctor in the movie, and she's not even mentioned in the media that takes place right after it, which I think is interesting. And again, that's due to, I would have to assume, the rights of the character. But on the very first page, the Eighth Doctor thinks back to the events, and he says that it was an adventure of improbable and illogical events, which is kind of funny. And also, he goes and visits the Eye of Harmony on the TARDIS, which he notes, of course, isn't the real Eye of Harmony, because that's back on Gallifrey. This is just a representation of the Eye of Harmony, which again covers over the fact that the movie really played loose with all the TARDIS stuff in a lot of ways. Like, there's no reason the real Eye of Harmony would ever be on this TARDIS. Of course it's going to be back on Gallifrey. So it was such strange writing for the movie to place it on the TARDIS. And it was just kind of funny how, yeah, he would go back and reference his own stuff, do very low, heavy digs and looks into the past toys of Classic Who. But he also couldn't help but throw some insults, weird as they may be, at the writing of the Doctor Who movie, which I just thought was kind of funny.
Yeah, and he also mentions to the Doctor thoughts that he wondered whether Master had gotten such morphic powers and how he became so powerful. And that's why I sort of appreciated them showing some post-survival Master actually going out and finding, what did you call it, like a Deathworm Morphant?
Yeah, the Deathworm Morphant is what the book calls them. And apparently, I think there's even another book that goes into detail as well.
So I just really appreciated that detail too. Like the Doctor's asking a question and we actually find out the answer like with 5 pages to go.
Yeah, it was really nice seeing what the Master's up to and how that all worked out. And really explaining the whole, what the hell is that Siri thing? Which did seem to come out of absolutely nowhere in the movie. So I really do appreciate the book for that, at least. But before we discuss our final thoughts on this book, the timeline section of also. As listeners know, the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each Doctor, including the extensive extended media, ranging from the comic books, comic strips, Big Finish, and BBC audio, the multiple book ranges, and everything in between. Doctor Who canon, insofar as it actually has one, is a jumbled mass and has been forever. So I'd just like to see where this choice we're discussing fit into the universe as a whole, as continuity in the narrative timeline has always been of interest to me. And as referenced numerous times during this discussion, this takes place right after the 1996 TV movie. So that's easy enough to place. According to the TARDIS Wiki, right after this, and this is just one of those random bits of Doctor Who media, which is why we do the timeline section, because there's so much out there. And while the Big Finish things are common, the, of course, classic series, the book ranges, there's so much more. There's Lucy Wilson, the granddaughter of the Brigadier?
Yeah, and those books are not easy to obtain in the USA, let me tell you that.
Yeah, if there's anybody in the UK who wants to help some lads out, by all means, like, we have money, we'll discuss things with you, because we do want to get our hands on some of these books, especially these rare ones. But right after this, and in fact, it's placed right after the Eight Doctors because it is Sam's first journey on the TARDIS. And for the record, like we said, Sam appears at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, and we're assuming we're going to get more of Sam in the Vampire Sciences. I mean, I would hope so. But Sam basically barges right onto the TARDIS, following the Doctor. She is very blasé about, oh yeah, you're an alien, whatever. Oh, the TARDIS is big on the inside. Oh, it's just transcendental. And she was just really just rolling with everything. And the Doctor's even trying to surprise her. And he just wasn't really getting anything. And eventually he's like, hey, what's going on? Why aren't you surprised about anything? She's like, I live in the 90s. We see sci-fi all the time. This is normal. And she was talking about movies, but it was just kind of hilarious, her attitude. And so she just wanted to go on a trip with the doctor, and the doctor's like, kind of just gave in. Fine, we can go on one trip. And so that was kind of funny. But the thing right after where we get to see our first trip is the audio story Bounty, which was released on a double cassette on September 7th, 1998. The cassette being Earth and Beyond, which was a collection of 3 audio stories which were read by Paul McGann. And just think about that. A double cassette being released in 1998 that has 3 stories on it, and that's just something that exists in Doctor Who history. I just think that's extremely interesting. The source story Bounty is actually exclusive to this cassette. It's never been released anywhere else. Actually, now that I think about it, it might have been released in some Lost in Time CDs that came out in 2004. But even those are probably themselves lost in time at this point. The other stories on this, I think one had previously been released in a Short Trips book, I think the first Short Trips, and one was released in the second Short Trips book. But Bounty is actually mostly exclusive to this thing. So I just think that's an extremely interesting story. One of those things that you'll probably never hear about or read about unless you're really going into the Doctor Who lore and timeline and stuff like that. And I just think that's a fascinating thing that'll probably be very interesting to listen to.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I like the timeline section so much. Because you see how random all of this canon stuff is and the lengths at times that they go through to try to fit this stuff in. It's just fun. And actually, I think fun is a good way to describe the 8 Doctors as a whole. The previous books we've read, I think, have all been good in different ways. We haven't read a ton of books yet, but just to go over them briefly, there was The Wheel of Ice by Stephen Baxter, which at times came across very much as a hard science fiction novel. And to be fair, Baxter I think he was an engineer. So he had some experience behind him and he wrote what he knew. But he also wrote what we don't know. So some of those sections were a bit more difficult to ascertain.
Yeah, very dense for those of us who are not science inclined, which would be us.
Monogra, which was written by Stephen Mowley, had sort of a similar issue. It was very technological heavy at times, and I don't think it quite reached like the hard science levels of Baxter's book, but it was still really dense and sort of difficult to get into at the beginning. Like once things were explained a bit more, it evened out a bit. But there was a lot of stuff then, and to be fair, that book was also long. I think it was like 340-ish pages or so. And it was a well-written book. Certainly the prose was nice. Like James said, The 8 Doctors was written in a much more simple way insofar as the prose is concerned. But Monogra is still difficult at times to fully get into. And then The Man in the Velvet Mask, well, I mean, I enjoyed it enough, but it wasn't like you or I. And that might be the best way to explain it. So I'll say that while this book was written in a more simple manner, and there were points toward the beginning with Sam v. the gang and then the whole police station stuff, there were some sections that I don't think were written that well. Or certainly I would have written them differently. But overall, I thought the novel was actually not only good, I actually quite enjoyed it. Like, I legitimately wanted to keep reading after like finishing a chapter to see what's going on, which is a good thing for the first book in a series like this. Obviously, to be engaged and to try to capture the audience's attention is what they would be aiming for, and I think they did a pretty good job with this. No, my opinion apparently does not match that of others in the fandom. Apparently this book isn't thought on highly by some, but I really have little connection to what the Doctor Who fandom thinks of on any given topic, so I mean, what can I do?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I like this book as much as you, but I also have very little connection with the fandom because I actually extremely liked The Man in the Velvet Mask, especially after a second read. Something about it just really clicked with me, and I'm not sure what that something was, and maybe it's still I liked parts of it more than the whole, but either way, it fascinated me. And this book, the writing, the prose was very to the point. There wasn't all that much mystery on the whole. We basically knew who the quote-unquote bad guys war as soon as they were introduced. There was not much hidden from the readers, and there was obviously a place for that, and I agree the book was seemingly more approachable. And I think on the whole, like I said earlier, it really is a love letter to the past series, the classic series. But I do miss the writing that we've been reading from people like Stephen Mowley and Daniel O'Mahony. And obviously, like I said, people have different writing styles. And I'm looking forward to certainly the next book in this, especially because I want to see more about Sam. I find Samantha extremely fascinating as a character, and I'd just like to know more about her. But it's hard for me to think about this story independent of the writing, which I think was, again, just weak here. The Man in the Velvet Mask was writing at a college thesis level. I think this is writing maybe freshman in high school. That might sound like an extremely mean comparison, but I don't think it's that far from the truth, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's simplistic, but I'll be honest, and this may not be a surprise. Out of the books that we've read, this has easily been my favorite. And part of it's the love letter scene our 7 doctors meeting up with the 8th. I think it's fun. So that's part of it. But if someone like Stephen Mowley had been given this toy, we might not know what the fuck's happening. And yeah, if a book's overly complicated, complex, and you can argue that maybe the Man in the Velvet Mask or Monogram weren't overly complex, but portions of both certainly were, and I'll fight you on that. When books come across as overly complex and tedious to read, and there were sections in both books where I had to read multiple times because I had no idea what the hell was going on, I don't think that's a good thing. Now, you might say, oh, you can read it again and it's fine. And if you have to read a book a second time or watch a movie a second time to quote-unquote get it, then fuck off. And I may sound angry, but it just comes across as pretentious to me. Now, I'm not saying it's the case with either one of these books, but it is the case with some media, and I just never cared for that, and it always sort of pisses me off, to be honest. Now, this book is more simplistic in writing style, but I don't think it's so simplistic as to turn people off. Theoretically, like I said, it should be approachable. Like when you're writing a book and you intentionally make some portions more complex, what the hell do you expect when people complain about the complexity? Like, maybe some people like it, but you're reaching out to a smaller audience. And I get that the audience of Doctor Who is not exceptionally high in terms of population, but you would probably not want to turn too many people off, which is what some classic episodes did, especially I think during Tom Baker's time, like the Leisure Hive season. And from my experience with some Doctor Who books do, and I'm not saying that's a negative thing, but I do think it's something to be aware of, that some books are going to be more approachable, and I don't think that's a bad thing that they might try to be reaching out to like a wider audience.
I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, but I would just say that reaching out to a larger audience is also kind of ignoring the audience you had. Think about it. One of the last books published in the 7th Doctor New Adventure range was Langborough. And do you think people who had gotten used to the complex styles, the way those stories were presented, would have read this first book of this series and thought there's going to be up too much? Now, obviously, again, the series apparently has a lot of things going on. And I just think that while you can appreciate them making the writing easier to maybe attract new readers, you also cannot blame the people who are getting used to the writing for the VNAs for thinking it was too simple. And that's just all I'll say on the issue. I really do think the book is pretty good. I really liked it. But I do wish the writing was maybe taken up, maybe not to Monogram levels, but taken up a little bit. But like I said, we'll have a different writer for the next book, so I look forward to what that is.
Yeah, and naturally, that's just our thoughts. If you've read the 8 Doctors, or in fact, the whole of the EDAs, we'll be interested to hear your thoughts, especially on how this book compares to later novels, which you do have a smattering of. But you can also reach out to us on Twitter at Brothers Mahoney, where you could also follow us, of course, or you could just comment down here below on YouTube. But what do we have coming up next, James?
Up next, we have David Tennant in the Children in Need short Born Again, which I believe came out in 2005. This would have been just a 5-minute, 6-minute short with David Tennant and Billy Piper. And it's just a small little scene that takes place in between the Pardon of the Ways and the Christmas Invasion. There's no action advance or anything of the sort. It's just a discussion between the Doctor and Rose, while Rose is trying to get used to and figure out what's going on in this situation. So that'll be fun to see. I don't know how long the discussion is going to be. Again, it's only 6 minutes, but we thought it was certainly worth a discussion before we jump into season 2 of the Reviver series.
Indeed, but that's been us talking about the 8 Doctors. Fascinating book, I thought. Certainly a fun one. But thanks for listening. As always, this has been Michael.
And I've been James.
You've been enjoying the Brothers Mahoney. And hashtag like and subscribe.